The seventh blade went in slower than the first six. Not because Tony Marquez hesitated, but because he wanted Bumpy Johnson to feel it. March 11, 1945. Sing Sing Prison. D-Block Corridor. 2:17 p.m. The concrete floor was already wet with blood, thick, dark, spreading outward like spilled oil. 60 inmates stood frozen behind iron bars, hands gripping steel, eyes locked on the body collapsing in front of them. Ellsworth, Bumpy Johnson, Harlem's king, hit the ground hard. The sound wasn't dramatic. Just bone on concrete. Final. Heavy. 7 stab wounds. Abdomen. Chest. Back, between the ribs. 1 punctured lung. 2 inches from the heart. Every placement was deliberate and every angle practiced. Tony, the Blade, Marquez stood over him, chest rising and falling. Sweat ran down his temples. His shiv, sharpened for weeks in the prison machine shop, trembled slightly in his hand. Beside him, Vincent Callow cracked his knuckles unconsciously. 6'3". 240 pounds. Former boxer. Prison muscle. To the right, Sal Romano said nothing. He never did. His job was reliability. And reliability meant silence. Bumpy tried to breathe. Blood bubbled at his lips. His eyes stayed open. That's what unsettled people later. Tony crouched down, close enough that only Bumpy could hear him. Lucky Luciano sends his regards, Tony whispered. Then, quieter, Harlem's ours now. Bumpy's mouth moved. No sound came out. Just blood. A wet, choking cough followed, the kind that makes even murderers look away. Tony smiled. He stood, wiped his blade on his prison trousers, and nodded to the others. He's done, he said. Let's go. They walked away calmly, 3 Italian inmates who had just killed the most feared black man in American organized crime, in front of 60 witnesses, without a single scream. For 3 seconds, no one moved. Then the whistles blew. Guards came running. Boots thundered down the corridor. A baton clattered to the floor. One guard dropped to his knees beside Bumpy and pressed 2 fingers to his neck. His hands were shaking. Jesus Christ, the guard muttered. He's still breathing. They lifted Bumpy onto a stretcher. His blood smeared the concrete in a long, unmistakable trail, a red signature down D-Block. In the infirmary, Dr. Harrison didn't waste time. 7 wounds. Severe blood loss. Collapsed lung. He looked at the warden and didn't sugarcoat it. I'll try, he said. But he's got 6 hours. 8 if he's lucky. That night, Tony Marquez slept peacefully. So did Vincent Callow. So did Sal Romano. They passed contraband whiskey between bunks and laughed quietly about how easy it had been. They believed the story was over. They were wrong. Because Bumpy Johnson did not die, and in Sing Sing prison, surviving an execution attempt didn't make you lucky. It made you dangerous. Hour 1. Bumpy Johnson lay unconscious on a narrow infirmary bed, chest barely rising, skin the color of wet ash. Each breath sounded like it had to fight its way out of him. Blood-soaked bandages wrapped his torso like crude armor that had already failed. Dr. Harrison stood over him longer than necessary. He'd seen stabbed men before. He'd seen shot men. He'd signed death certificates with cleaner hands than this. He should already be gone, the doctor muttered. Hour 6. Bumpy was still alive. The punctured lung wheezed, pulling air the hard way. His pulse fluttered, weak but stubborn. A nurse checked his vitals twice, then a third time, just to be sure. Heart still beating, she said, disbelief creeping into her voice. Hour 12. Dr. Harrison returned, expecting a corpse. Instead, he found Ellsworth Johnson staring at the ceiling. Eyes open. Focused. Alive. Bumpy couldn't speak. Every attempt ended in a rasp and a wet cough. But his eyes followed the doctor's movements. Calculating. Present. That's when Harrison felt it, the thing no chart could explain. This man wasn't surviving by accident. Hour 24. Word spread through Sing Sing the only way it ever did, not through announcements, not through guards, but through silence. Bumpy Johnson was still breathing. Tony Marquez heard it during morning count. A guard's tone was off. Too careful. Too restrained. Vincent Callow heard it from a runner coming back from the infirmary detail. Johnson ain't dead, the kid whispered. They say he opened his eyes. Vincent laughed it off. 7 stabs, he said. 1 lung gone. Nobody survives that. Sal Romano said nothing, but that night, he didn't sleep. Because Sal understood something the others didn't. Men like Bumpy didn't survive things like that unless the world still needed them. Here's what Tony, Vincent, and Sal never understood about Sing Sing. The prison wasn't run by guards. It was run by routines. By the men who moved food. By the hands that cleaned blood. By the backs that carried laundry. By the people nobody looked at long enough to fear. And Bumpy Johnson had spent 18 months inside Sing Sing doing something unusual. He remembered names. The porter who mopped D Block every morning at 5:40 a.m. The kitchen man who skimmed grease off soup kettles. The laundry worker who fixed broken buttons instead of throwing shirts away. Bumpy called them Mr. He listened when they spoke. He paid debts in protection, not money. So when Bumpy Johnson lay in that infirmary bed, barely able to breathe, his body was broken. But his reputation was fully awake. Hour 36. A porter named James was assigned to mop the infirmary hallway. James was 48. Thin. Quiet. Invisible. As he pushed his mop past Bumpy's door, a guard looked away for half a second. That was enough. James stepped inside. Bumpy's eyes moved toward him immediately. James leaned close. Very close. Bumpy's voice was barely a breath. 3 words. That was all. James nodded once. No questions. No fear. He left the room, finished his shift, and disappeared into the prison's circulatory system. By evening, the prison had begun to change. Not loudly. Subtly. A bucket of industrial grease went missing from the maintenance closet near D Block. No report filed. No guard noticed. On the 3rd tier, Vincent Callow stretched his legs before evening movement. Same routine he'd done 1,000 times. He felt powerful. Untouchable. What he didn't feel was the thin, invisible layer of grease waiting for him halfway down the metal staircase. But that hadn't happened yet. For now, Bumpy Johnson closed his eyes and let the pain wash over him. He wasn't angry. He wasn't afraid. He was patient. Because Bumpy Johnson understood something that kept him alive when others died. Revenge didn't need speed. It needed timing. And Sing Sing prison was about to deliver it. Vincent Callow trusted staircases. That sounds strange, but in prison, you trust the things that never change. Same steps. Same count. Same metal edges worn smooth by decades of boots. At 9:12 a.m. movement bell rang. Vincent stepped out of his cell on the 3rd tier like he always did, shoulders wide, posture loose, confidence casual. Men moved out of his way without thinking. Some out of fear. Some out of habit. He started down the stairs. 1 step. 2. 3. Then his foot slid. Not a stumble. A complete betrayal. His heel lost all traction, his weight shifted forward, and gravity took over instantly. Vincent's massive body slammed sideways, his back striking the railing, his head snapping against steel. The sound echoed. A deep, hollow clang, metal meeting bone, repeated again and again as he tumbled. 20 steps. Each one a hammer. Back. Neck. Spine. By the time Vincent hit the bottom, he wasn't moving. For a moment, Sing Sing held its breath. Then Vincent screamed. Not anger. Not threats. Panic. I can't feel my legs, he shouted. I can't feel my legs. Guards rushed in, boots skidding. One tried to lift him. Don't move him, another yelled. The prison doctor arrived, knelt, ran his hands along Vincent's spine. His face drained of color. Spinal trauma, he said quietly. Severe. They wheeled Vincent to the infirmary. Word spread faster this time. Vincent Callow, the enforcer, the boxer, the man nobody touched, lay staring at the ceiling, unable to move anything below his waist. When Dr. Harrison finished the examination, he didn't bother lying. Permanent damage, he said. You'll never walk again. Vincent laughed once. A short, broken sound. No, he said. Fix it. Dr. Harrison shook his head. There's nothing to fix. For the first time in years, Vincent Callow was afraid. A wheelchair arrived that afternoon. The guards pushed him through the corridor. Inmates watched in silence. A big man becoming small is one of the most unsettling sights in prison. Sal Romano heard about Vincent just before lunch. A guard muttered it under his breath. Another shook his head. Sal kept feeding uniforms into the industrial press. The machine was enormous, rollers taller than a man's chest, pressure strong enough to flatten denim into paper-thin sheets. He'd worked it for 8 months without incident. Sal was careful by nature. That's why he didn't notice the safety release had been disabled. That's why, when his sleeve caught for half a second, the machine didn't stop. It pulled. Hard. Sal screamed as his hand disappeared between the rollers. Bones shattered with a sound like snapping branches. Men ran. Guards hit the emergency shutoff. Too late. They pulled his hand free. There was no hand anymore. Just crushed flesh and fragments of bone where fingers used to be. In the infirmary, Dr. Harrison closed his eyes for a long moment before speaking. The hand can't be saved. Sal swallowed hard. Just the hand, he asked. The doctor didn't answer directly. 3 days later, infection spread. Black crept up Sal's arm despite antibiotics. Gangrene. Fast. Relentless. Dr. Harrison had no choice. He amputated the arm at the shoulder. Sal Romano woke up with one arm in a prison where 2 were required to survive. Tony Marquez heard about both men by dinner. Vincent in a wheelchair. Sal missing an arm. The mess hall felt different that night. Too quiet. Tony ate slower than usual. He told himself it was coincidence. That's when the oatmeal went down the wrong way. Tony coughed. Hard. Air refused to come back. Guards rushed over. 1 Heimlich. 2. 3. Nothing. Tony collapsed, clawing at his throat, eyes bulging, face turning purple. Finally, the blockage cleared. Tony gasped, once. Then his heart stopped. Dr. Harrison arrived running. CPR. Chest compressions. Minutes passing. For minutes without oxygen. Tony's heart restarted. But his eyes stayed empty. The doctor checked his pupils. His hands trembled. Brain death, he whispered. Tony Marquez would breathe for 17 more years. But Tony Marquez was already gone. Hour 72. Warden Miller entered the infirmary. Bumpy Johnson sat upright in bed, reading. Bandaged. Pale. Alive. The warden stared at him for a long moment. You did this, he said. Bumpy didn't look up. Prison's dangerous, he replied. You destroyed 3 men. Bumpy closed his book. They tried to kill me. Silence stretched. I didn't take their lives, Bumpy said calmly. I took something worse. The warden understood. This wasn't revenge. This was balance. Tony Marquez didn't die in the mess hall. That was the cruel part. They revived his heart after 4 minutes without oxygen, just long enough for something essential to disappear forever. When he woke up, his eyes were open. That fooled people at first. They thought he could see. They thought he could hear. They were wrong. Tony's pupils didn't track movement. His mouth opened and closed without words. His hands twitched randomly, like broken machinery cycling without purpose. Dr. Harrison ran the tests twice. Then a 3rd time. Finally, he stepped back and said what no one wanted to hear. Permanent vegetative state. The phrase landed heavy. Tony Marquez, made man in the Luciano family. Feared inside Sing Sing. Protected by guards, by influence, by reputation. Reduced to a breathing shell. They placed him in a wheelchair. A feeding tube ran into his stomach. Guards wiped drool from his chin. Orderlies changed him when he soiled himself. And every morning, they wheeled him into the mess hall. Not for his sake. For everyone else's. In prison, visibility is punishment. Men stopped eating when Tony rolled past. Conversations died mid-sentence. Eyes followed him, not with pity, but with recognition. That's Tony the Blade. That's what's left of him. That's what happens when you don't finish the job. Vincent Callow watched Tony pass from his own wheelchair, hands gripping useless legs that no longer listened to him. Sal Romano watched too, his empty sleeve pinned neatly to his uniform, his balance forever off, his confidence gone. None of them spoke to each other. They didn't need to. Sing Sing had already delivered the verdict. 3 days after the stabbing, Warden Miller stood in the infirmary doorway again. Bumpy Johnson was sitting up straighter now. Still weak. Still stitched. But unmistakably alive. You've made your point, the warden said. Bumpy didn't smile. You ever lie on concrete bleeding? He asked softly, thinking the men who stabbed you were already celebrating. The warden didn't answer. That's the worst part, Bumpy continued. Not the pain. Not the blood. The certainty they felt. He paused. They were wrong. The warden exhaled slowly. This ends here. Bumpy nodded. It already did. Tony Marquez lived for 17 more years. Every one of them exactly the same. Fed through a tube. Bathed by others. Wheeled past men who whispered his name like a warning. Vincent Callow finished his sentence in a wheelchair, released in 1965, unable to walk, unable to fight, dependent on family who barely recognized him. Sal Romano got out in 1953 with one arm, couldn't find work, couldn't survive the world he'd once dominated. He died cold and forgotten. Bumpy Johnson walked out of Sing Sing in 1947. On his own 2 feet. Years later, an interviewer asked him about the stabbing. 7 times, Bumpy said quietly. If they'd stabbed me 8, I'd be dead. He looked away. But they stopped at 7. That was their mistake. Stories don't spread in prison the way they do outside. There are no newspapers. No official records worth trusting. They spread through routine. Through the same meals. The same corridors. The same warnings whispered just loud enough to be heard. By the end of that month, every cell block in Sing Sing knew the rule. You don't try to kill a man unless you're certain he won't wake up. Because if he does, death won't be the price. Something worse will be. Tony Marquez became part of the furniture. Every morning, guards wheeled him into the mess hall at exactly the same time. Same chair. Same angle. Same blank stare aimed at nothing. Men would pause mid-step when they saw him. New inmates asked questions their first week. "Who's that?" The answer never changed. "That's Tony the Blade." "What happened to him?" "He stabbed Bumpy Johnson." No one ever laughed after that. Tony lived 17 years like that, heart beating, lungs working, mind absent. A man preserved only to be seen. Only to be remembered. Vincent Callow lasted longer than his pride. He learned how to maneuver a wheelchair in a place built to punish weakness. Learned which corridors were safest. Learned how fast strength disappears when your legs stop obeying. In 1965, they released him. He walked, or tried to, out of Sing Sing in a chair pushed by someone else. The boxer who once ruled tears couldn't cross a street alone. Sal Romano didn't even get that dignity. He learned to eat with one hand. To balance with one arm. To sleep without feeling whole again. The world outside prison didn't care what he used to be. Jobs wanted two hands. Life demanded balance. He died in 1958, exposed, broke, and forgotten. 3 men who tried to kill Bumpy Johnson. 3 lives erased without a single bullet fired. Bumpy Johnson walked free in 1947. No limp. No escort. No celebration. Just Harlem waiting. Years later, sitting in a quiet room, an interviewer asked him if he regretted what happened to those men. Bumpy thought for a long moment. "They stabbed me 7 times, he said finally. He tapped the table once. 7. The interviewer leaned forward. What happened to them was brutal. Bumpy's eyes didn't change. "What they did to me was brutal," he said. "I just made sure the punishment fit the crime." He stood up slowly. "That wasn't revenge," he added. "That was mathematics." In Sing Sing, they still tell the story. They tell it to new inmates who think reputation is enough. To men who believe violence ends things cleanly. To anyone who thinks survival is the same as winning. The lesson never changes. You can stab Bumpy Johnson 7 times. But unless the last blade stops his heart, he's going to wake up. And when he does, you won't die. You'll wish you had. If this story struck your heart, subscribe for more related videos. Now tell me, was this justice, or did Bumpy go too far? Leave a comment below. Don't forget to turn on notifications.